I was the shadow in their perfect family photo, invisible, unwanted, and always blamed. Part 1. They always said I was the problem, the black sheep who didn't fit the mold. From the time I was a little girl growing up in that cold, cramped apartment, their words cut deeper than the winter frost that seeped through the thin walls. "You're nothing but a mistake, Mia," my mother spat one evening, her eyes hollow with disappointment. My father nodded silently from the couch, his jaw tight. I was only 12, but already I knew I was alone. School was no sanctuary either. Teachers dismissed me as slow, classmates whispered cruel jokes I couldn't understand. At home, the silence was deafening. My sister, the golden child, was everything I wasn't. Smart, beautiful, adored. I watched her bask in light while I faded into shadows. There were nights I cried in the bathroom, gripping the cold porcelain sink, wishing for a miracle. But miracles didn't come. Instead, I learned to hide, to keep my head down, to survive. At 16, I found a temporary escape in art. Drawing became my secret world, a place where colors replaced harsh words and where I could dream beyond the grey walls of my life. But even that wasn't safe. One day, my mother tore my sketchbook from my hands. "What a waste of time," she sneered. "You'll never be good enough." The rejection stung like fire. I wanted to scream, to tell her she was wrong, but the words got caught in my throat. I felt hopeless, trapped in a cycle I couldn't break. Graduation came and went without ceremony. I didn't have the grades for college. No one believed I could do better. At 18, I left. Packing a single suitcase, I walked out with nothing but a fierce determination to prove them wrong. The streets were unforgiving. I worked nights as a waitress, days as a cleaner, living hand to mouth. Hunger was a constant companion. Cold nights wrapped in threadbare blankets tested my will. There were moments when the weight of loneliness crushed me. Times I thought about giving up, letting the world win. But a stubborn ember burned inside. I started taking online classes, teaching myself everything I could about business and marketing. Slowly, I saved enough to launch a small handmade jewelry line. Sales trickled in, but it was a start. Every sale was a victory, a crack in the wall that held me prisoner. Still, the past haunted me. Letters from my family arrived, filled with bitterness and blame. "You'll never succeed without us," they wrote. But I was learning to trust myself, to build something real from the ashes. Then came the call that would change everything. A wealthy entrepreneur, Mr. Donovan, reached out after hearing about my jewelry online. He invited me to meet him. I was terrified. Who was he? Why me? But I knew this was my chance, a chance to rewrite the story written for me. As I prepared for the meeting, memories of my mother's harsh words echoed in my mind. "You'll never be good enough." That night, I vowed to prove her wrong, not just for me, but for every whispered doubt that ever held me down. Part 2. The night before the meeting with Mr. Donovan, I barely slept. My mind raced with every possible outcome, both hopeful and terrifying. What if he laughed at me, like so many had? What if this was just another cruel joke life was playing? But beneath the fear, a fierce resolve pulsed through me. This was the crossroads. I dressed carefully, my handmade jewelry wrapped safely in a small box. Stepping outside into the chill morning air, I felt the weight of my past trailing behind me, but I didn't turn back. The sleek office building where Mr. Donovan awaited was a world apart from the cracked sidewalks I knew so well. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and suited assistants glided past without a glance. I was out of place, painfully aware of my threadbare jacket and worn shoes. When I met Mr. Donovan, I was surprised. He wasn't the intimidating tycoon I'd imagined. Instead, he smiled warmly, eyes sharp but kind. "I've seen a lot of talent in my life," he said, "but few with the heart you have." His words unlocked a flood of emotions. Disbelief, hope, a tentative joy I hadn't allowed myself in years. We talked for hours about my vision, my struggles, and my dreams. He didn't just see a small business owner, he saw potential, a future leader. But the offer he made was risky. He wanted me to leave everything behind, to move across the country and work with his team to expand my jewelry line on a massive scale. It was terrifying, leaving the only life I'd carved out, facing the unknown again. The stakes were enormous. What if I failed? But then I thought of the nights I spent hungry, the cold I endured, the voices telling me I'd never make it. I knew I couldn't let fear win again. I said yes. That decision marked the start of the hardest year of my life, moving to a new city, navigating corporate politics, and trying to prove myself every single day. There were moments when I felt invisible, a small fish in a vast, unforgiving ocean. Old doubts clawed at me in the quiet hours. "Are you really good enough?" they whispered, but each morning I reminded myself why I was there. Because I was no longer just surviving, I was fighting for a future I once thought impossible. My jewelry line grew, sales skyrocketed. Clients praised my designs, but success didn't erase the scars. One evening, as I worked late, my phone buzzed. A message from my sister, the one who'd once been my rival, my tormentor. "I heard about your success. Maybe we should talk." My heart clenched. Could I trust her now? Was this apology genuine or another trap? I stared at the message long after the screen went dark. Part of me wanted to forgive, to heal old wounds. Another part was scared, afraid of being hurt again. That night I lay awake thinking about what family truly meant. Was it blood, history, or was it the people who stood by you when the world turned its back? For so long, I'd believed I was unworthy of love, of belonging. But now I was beginning to believe in something else. That I was worthy, that I was more than their words, more than my past. And that maybe, just maybe, I could choose who stayed in my life. Part 3. The city had a way of swallowing you whole, a relentless pulse that pushed me forward even when my own legs felt weak. I threw myself into my work like it was oxygen, because in those moments, it was the only thing keeping me alive. Every sketch, every order, every late night became a small victory carved from exhaustion and doubt. Months passed, and my jewelry brand blossomed into something real, something respected, but success came with a price. I found myself tangled in a web of expectations, deadlines, and endless meetings with people who judged me by the weight of my bank account, not the fire in my heart. One afternoon, a former co-worker, Lily, the one I'd trusted most when I first arrived, pulled me aside. "Why do you always have to do everything alone?" she asked softly. Her words caught me off guard. I realized I had been carrying the burden by myself, afraid to lean on anyone, but opening up meant risking weakness. I wasn't sure I was ready. That evening, after the office emptied, I sat alone with my thoughts. The cold walls of my small apartment felt closer than ever, suffocating. I thought of the dark days, the hunger, the endless rejections, the nights I cried alone. The memories hit me hard, raw and unrelenting. Yet, amidst the pain, a fragile strength grew. I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. I was a woman who had clawed her way from nothing. But then the past came calling again. An unexpected email arrived from my mother. It was brief, almost businesslike. "Your sister wants to meet. She says she regrets everything." My hands trembled. Part of me wanted to say no, to slam the door on the past forever. But another part craved closure. I agreed to meet. We chose a quiet cafe, the kind where whispers seemed louder and memories hung heavy in the air. When I saw her, the girl I once envied and resented, my heart wrenched. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable. "I'm sorry, Mia," she said, voice breaking. "I was jealous and cruel. I didn't realize how much I hurt you." The honesty surprised me. I wanted to scream, to cry, to forgive, but years of pain held me back. "Why now?" I asked. "Because I see you," she whispered. "Not just as the shadow I wanted to hide from, but as the woman you've become." For the first time, I allowed a flicker of hope to bloom. Maybe healing was possible. Maybe the broken pieces could be put back together, not perfectly, but enough. As we talked, I felt the weight of old wounds start to lift, not entirely gone, but lighter. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about freeing myself, walking away from bitterness, and choosing peace. Leaving the cafe, I felt a strange calm. The city lights shimmered with promise. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt alive. I had survived. I had risen, and the future, uncertain, challenging but mine, stretched out before me. Part 4. Success had a way of drawing shadows. People from my past started to appear like ghosts at the edges of my new life. The invitations came first. Old classmates, distant relatives, even neighbors who had once ignored my existence. They reached out with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, voices coated in syrupy admiration. I knew their game. They wanted a piece of the new me, the woman who had risen from the ashes. One evening, as I hosted a small launch event for a new collection, I spotted a familiar face across the room. Jake, my childhood friend who once promised he'd have my back no matter what, then vanished when I needed him most. He approached cautiously, his eyes flickering with something between shame and greed. "Mia," he said, voice hesitant. I've been watching your journey. You're incredible." I forced a polite smile but kept my guard up. "You disappeared when I was struggling," I reminded him quietly. He looked down, ashamed. "I was scared. I didn't know how to help." That excuse rang hollow. I had faced the storm alone while he ran away. "People change," I said finally, my tone cool but steady. "Maybe someday you'll understand what loyalty really means." As he nodded awkwardly and walked away, I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. I wasn't the scared girl who needed approval anymore. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message I hadn't expected. My father. "I'm proud of you, Mia." My breath caught. The man who once dismissed me as a failure was reaching out. I stared at the screen, emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to reply, to heal the fractured bond. But another part, hardened by years of pain, whispered caution. I realized forgiveness wasn't simple. It was a journey I had to walk on my own terms. I typed a single sentence. "Thank you. I'm finding my own way now." Days turned to weeks. My brand flourished, and so did I. I hired a small team, people who believed in the vision and the woman behind it. Together, we created not just jewelry, but a story of resilience, one that inspired others who felt invisible, unheard. But with success came new battles. Corporate sharks circled, jealous competitors whispered behind closed doors. The pressure mounted. One afternoon, a major investor pulled out unexpectedly. The blow hit hard, threatening everything I'd built. Fear crept in, the old demons of doubt and failure. But this time, I faced them head-on. I called a team meeting. "We've been through tough times before," I told them. "This is just another challenge. We adapt, we fight, and we win." Their eyes shone with renewed hope. I realized then that leadership wasn't just about success. It was about lifting others when they faltered. I was no longer alone in the fight. That night, as I looked out over the city skyline from my office window, I felt a quiet strength. The journey had been brutal, painful, and exhausting, but every scar told a story of survival and triumph. And as the lights below twinkled like stars, I whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." Part 5. The years had changed everything, except the fire inside me. Now, standing in the grand hall of my company's headquarters, I watched the crowd gather for the annual gala. The room shimmered with crystal chandeliers and laughter, a world away from the nights I once spent shivering on worn-out benches. As the applause swelled, I felt the weight of every sacrifice, every heartbreak, every moment I almost gave up. And here I was, at the pinnacle. Among the faces in the crowd, familiar eyes watched me, some filled with envy, others with disbelief, some even with regret. There was my old boss, the man who'd fired me unjustly, now pretending to be impressed. There was the family who once disowned me, sitting stiffly in the corner, their smiles brittle and forced. I caught my mother's gaze, a flicker of something unspoken, maybe shame, maybe longing. But I felt no anger, only a calm, fierce pride. When the time came to speak, I stepped to the podium. The room hushed. "I am not the person I was when I walked through those doors years ago," I began. "My journey was not easy. I was called a failure. I was broken down and left to rebuild alone." My voice caught, but I pressed on. But that pain taught me something crucial. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising every single time you do. A pause. I stand here today not to boast, but to remind anyone who's been told they're less than, your story isn't over, your value isn't defined by others. After my speech, a few approached me, some with genuine congratulations, others with veiled motives. Jake was there again. He said quietly, "You're incredible, Mia. I'm sorry I wasn't there before." I smiled softly, the old wounds healing enough to let kindness in. My sister hugged me, tears in her eyes. And my father? He simply nodded, no words needed. Later that night, as I locked up the office, I pulled out the small box of handmade jewelry I'd carried with me all those years ago. I traced the delicate designs with trembling fingers, from poverty and pain to strength and success, from loneliness to connection, from silence to my own voice. I whispered into the quiet room, "This is my story." And I knew deep down that whatever came next, I was ready.